The next spreadsheet to complete for the county data report process is the BMP spreadsheet. Again, instructions are at the top of the page. You can edit any of the data in the BMP spreadsheet, but for the most part, the only sections that you should be adding data into or adjusting in some way are those in the yellow boxes. And that is stated in the instructions themselves. This overall spreadsheet is attempting to capture best management practices that reduce nitrogen loss from cropping systems that were implemented in the last crop year. Each county is asked to provide the best estimate for unfertilized cover crops that were planted in the last crop year for the species that are listed in the spreadsheet. For unfertilized cover crops, some counties only report those cover crops implemented that they have cost share information on. Some counties report unfertilized cover crop implementation based on knowledge of activities by farmers in their area. For example, some farmers are planting unfertilized, unharvested cover after tobacco, so they might estimate that 25% of the tobacco acreage estimated to be grown in the news portion of the county had some sort of unfertilized wheat cover planted on it in the last crop year. Throughout the spreadsheet, I include notes related to previous assumptions, like the unfertilized cover crop assumption that I just explained, and other relevant information that you might consider when you're ultimately going to be reporting values in these yellow boxes for the various BMPs that we capture through this nitrogen accounting process completed annually. So be sure to read through those comments to understand the spreadsheets more accurately and to make sure that you are able to complete them and factor all of the information that has previously been considered and used to generate estimates and what you're doing this year for the county data report process. All right, now that I've kind of given an overview of the spreadsheet itself, we'll go through the motions of fully completing this BMP spreadsheet together. So the first part, again, if you're totally unfamiliar with the spreadsheet, please read through these instructions. I hope that they are helpful enough to provide some direction as to how you should begin completing this spreadsheet, but I'm familiar with this, so we'll move on down to the first section here, which is unfertilized cover. I'm going to read the comment that is posted in the cell, which is see cover crop acreage implemented using state and federal cost share funding on page 2. Include that acreage in the estimates provided here. We may also review cover crop acreage from the FSA crop report spreadsheet to inform a best estimate for unfertilized cover implemented in crop year 2023. All right. So let's do that. Let's scroll down to the cover crop acreage that was implemented with cost share funds by state and federal programs in the last crop year. So we can see, okay, great, cover crop was implemented and 50 acres was implemented and cost shared on the last year. Similarly, for federal programs, about 67 acres was at least consulted on. So technical assistance was provided for that practice on about 67 acres. I don't know whether that acreage amount was implemented or not, but you might consult field staff to see if that acreage amount should factor into your ultimate estimation. I do know that 44 acres was reported to have been implemented with EQIP funds this year as well. So I know at least at the bare minimum, and just this first blush review, that about at least 95 acres or so was implemented. Let's look over at our crop report spreadsheet again. And we can see in this spreadsheet that there was a lot of cover crops that were reported to FSA in crop year 2023 for our county. I will note that some FSA counties report a lot of cover crop. They might have a good way of estimating cover crop or getting farmers to report on the cover crop that they've been implementing. And some counties don't report a ton of cover crop in this way, or their FSA office doesn't collect a lot of cover crop information this way. So FSA data may be a good tool to factor into how unfertilized cover crops are estimated in your county for the previous crop year, but it might also not be that helpful of a tool to you. So just keep that in mind. This information is, as good as what is able to be reported and captured, and different counties have different abilities in that respect. But for the most part, I think in the last couple of years, FSA has been able to capture better information on implemented cover crops through their reporting process. So FSA cover crop information might be more useful to you all now in coming up with unfertilized cover crop estimates for the previous crop year in your counties. Okay. So it looks like our county FSA data shows that majority of the cover crops that FSA had reported was cereals and other grasses. We do see some brassicas and other broadleaves, as well as legumes and mixtures. But a majority is this cereals and other grasses cover. All right. So with that, and let's say that, we might have talked to some farmers, we might have talked to extension staff, regional agronomists, our NRCS field staff partners, and what we've ultimately come up with is that we think it makes sense to report 12,000 acres of wheat or unfertilized cover planted in the last crop year, and 4,000 acres of rye. And then we feel confident in the acreage amounts that were reported last year for barley, oats, and triticale were similarly implemented this year in crop year 2023. And so in total, based on the information available to us to provide this estimate, we're estimating in total about 17,000 acres of cover were implemented in crop year 2023. And that total amount includes the 90 or so acres that were cost shared on through federal and state programs, as well as, farmer implemented cover on their own dime that wasn't necessarily cost shared on. All right. Moving on down to buffers, just to kind of orient ourselves to the information in this table. Buffers are listed out in different width categories. You can see the nitrogen reduction credit that is provided in our nitrogen loss estimation worksheet tool for these different buffer width categories. If you have very big buffers, 100 foot or more, that receives the highest nitrogen reduction credit in our accounting tool. If you have smaller buffers, you receive less credit for reducing nitrogen from cropland. The next kind of column here is cumulative footprint acres from 2001 to 2022. So this is describing the total amount of implemented buffer, and that's what footprint acres means. It's implemented buffer. It's not necessarily the total affected area, total drainage area being affected by that buffer. It is just the physical implementation of that buffer area. And that is a cumulative value that has been totaled since reporting began for the Neuse Basin in the early 2000s. For Jordan Lake accounting, that number might have a different start date than 2001, but for the Neuse, that is a cumulative footprint acres reported for this demo county since reporting began up until last crop year. Because there are buffer rules in each of these strategies, it is assumed that any buffer that's been implemented has had to kind of remain in place since implementation. And so we don't subtract any buffer amounts annually from these totals. We only add to the acre totals calculated for buffers on ag land based on newly implemented buffers. Cumulative buffers is what is ultimately run through our nitrogen loss estimation tool. So we are not simply reporting what buffers were implemented in this last crop year. We always report the cumulative value. So for crop year 2023, let's say we had 10 acres of 20-foot buffer that was implemented in the portion of the county that lies within the Neuse Basin. The ultimate value for 20-foot buffers that we would run through the nitrogen loss estimation worksheet tool is 5,198 acres, which is the sum total of what was cumulatively reported and what was reported as to have been implemented this year. All right, now that we've oriented ourselves to the table and the information that's there, I'm going to read the comment on the cell. See field border acre implemented using state cost share funding on page 2. Was any field border implemented adjacent to a blue line stream? All right, I'm going to scroll down, and then yes, I can see that 0.14 acres of field border was implemented in the last crop year. And it looks like from the comments that this field border acreage looks like it is buffering a perennial or intermittent stream. This is the demo example, but let's say for the purposes of this demo that based on my knowledge of the contract and what was implemented, I can say with certainty that 0.1 acre of all of the total field border acres that were implemented with this cost share funding are actually directly adjacent and buffering a blue line water body on the farm. So I will be reporting this year that 0.10 acres of 20-foot buffer, which is the portion of this field border acres that was implemented this year, is serving as a riparian buffer. And based on my review of the other data from our federal programs, there's not anything else to consider with that and I might not be aware of any other projects or other things that were implemented without cost share funding from state or federal programs that implemented buffer on agricultural land. If you are aware of any projects, it could be, farmland preservation projects, could also be grant projects or other things like that you could potentially be reporting buffer for. Please do report buffer that was newly implemented, that you are aware was newly implemented in this last reporting year. Put it under the appropriate width category, so 20, 30, 50. You do not have to restrict the acreage totals to those that are cost shared on. So if somebody implemented on their own dime, you can report that acreage as long as you have knowledge that it was newly implemented in the last year, because we don't want to be double counting and potentially reporting on riparian buffer that we've previously captured in some way. All right. The next BMPs that I will cover in this video is for water control structures. Piedmont counties are not going to see this in their spreadsheets. Only coastal counties that can report water control structures for nitrogen reduction credit are going to see this. Again, to orient you all to this table, affected acreage from 2013 to 2022 is provided within the water control structure table here. And that is because we report total affected acres for water control structures that are under active maintenance agreements, unless field inspection results have shown that water control structures are being managed for water quality benefits. Really only one county in the coast has gone through this field inspection procedure for adding water control structure affected acres that are out of active contract, out of active maintenance agreements back into their county totals. So for the most part, most counties are not going to be able to add affected acres outside of those active contract acres to this value here. This value is not highlighted in yellow for you to adjust, but if you do want to take the time and kind of do a double check to make sure that this value is accurate for the contracts that you do currently have under active maintenance for water control structures, you are welcome to do so. This should be accurate. It's based on what has been reported by counties for the last 9 years for affected acres. We subtract affected acre values for contracts when they fall outside of that, the last 10-year window, but definitely appreciate double check if you are interested in providing that for that value that sums up what has cumulatively been implemented and reported on in the last 9 years for water control structures. All right, now that we've oriented ourselves to that table within this spreadsheet, I'm going to read the comment here. The district implemented 2 water control structures in 2023, and NRCS implemented 1, provided an affected acreage amount for those structures here. All right, so I'm going to scroll down and look at my best management practice data from the last year. That was tabulated out for me. And I can say, yep, this contract was implemented and 2 water control structures, which were part of that contract, were implemented. And based on the contract data, it looks like 123.45 acres are affected by the water control structures that were implemented as part of this contract. And if I scroll down to federal data, I can see that structure for water control was implemented, and I need to determine the affected acreage amount for this structure and sum it with the affected acreage amount for the structures that were implemented with that cost share funding support as well. So let's say for the purposes of this demo that this EQIP supported water control structure in total is managing about 100 acres worth of drainage within the county. And then of that 100 acres, 85 of those acres lie within the Neuse River Basin, and 15 acres lies within the Cape Fear River Basin, which does not have an ag roll. As a result of that, because only 85 acres is being managed within the Neuse River Basin, I will only be reporting 85 acres of that 100 acre affected amount for that, EQIP contract for reporting this year. And then let's say for the purposes of this demo that all 123.45 acres associated with this contract were within the Neuse River Basin. So in total, I would be adding 123.45 plus the 85 acres that the EQIP water control structure is managing within the Neuse, And I will be reporting a total of 208.45 affected acres for the water control structure practices in crop year 2023 reporting. All right, I'm also going to scroll down, make sure that I didn't miss any other yellow boxes. It does look like there is a yellow box here, so I'm going to read through the comments and see what I need to do to fill that in. And looks like there's a question. Was this implemented in crop year 2023? If yes, please specify a date for the contract that was implemented. And I can see this is a 2023 contract for cropland conversion to grass. Let's say I look it up and I realize that, well, that was actually implemented in November of 2023, which falls out of this crop year. So I don't necessarily have to report a date, but I might write a comment here as like, might select, the cell and say this contract was not implemented crop year 23. I might also just specify the date. So 11/2/2023, which clearly falls outside of the crop year. Again, the crop year is listed on your spreadsheet there from October 1, 2022 to September 30th, 2023. So let's say that I just do that. I report the actual date. So I think we filled out all of the yellow boxes in this spreadsheet. But let's kind of go through the instructions one last time, make sure we got everything. We've reviewed state and federal cost share BMP data on page 2. It's correct. We've reported a best estimate for unfertilized cover crops grown in the Neuse Basin. Yes, we have reported an implemented acreage of buffers, not acres affected by, that were installed during crop year 2023 in the Neuse Basin and the yellow boxes on page 1. We've done that. Report affected acreage of water control structures installed during crop year 2023 in the Neuse Basin and the yellow boxes. We've also done that as well. And reported date of implementation on page 2 for contract 101/2023-016. So we have done that as well. If we haven't reviewed the crop report, we would need to go over to the FSA crop report spreadsheet, follow the reporting instructions to complete that. And then if we've completed everything that we need to within our county data folder, then we can send an email to let me, Allie Dimity with the Division of Soil and Water, know that all of our county spreadsheets have been updated and completed. So with that, I hope this was helpful information to assist you in knowing how to accurately complete the county BMP data reporting spreadsheet for crop year 2023. Thank you.